First of all, thanks for coming, everyone. It's nice to see a lot of people here. They're a really important topic, and I'm sure a really good talk. My name is Dan Casper. I'm an instructor here in the Energy Technology Department. And before we begin, I want to introduce, just because this is the first talk of our semester, I want to just briefly introduce the speaker series that this is a part of. Before I introduce our friend Lemir. And so the Energy and Sustainability Speaker Series, of which this is a part of, is something we've been doing for about a year and a half now, since the Energy Technology Department along with the Electronics and Computer Engineering Department here. Incidentally, today's talk is also co-sponsored by the Social Sciences Department, who've been very generous in helping us to sort of promote and do some of these talks. And so, very briefly, the Energy and Sustainability Speaker Series, we wanted to bring in experts in their respective field to come in and address sustainability and or energy issues. Hopefully you'll see that sustainability is something that's very important, it's very contemporary, it's very relevant, and all the people that we bring in are experts in their field that are going to talk about that, talk specifically, address an aspect of sustainability. I'm just going to very briefly go over, so we have a couple more this semester. There will be emails sent out and flyers and everything, but I just want, in case you have your calendars in front of you. Sometime in February, we're still locking down the date. If you're probably aware that there's a new building being built, and that's partially the Energy Technology building. So we're putting together a roundtable discussion of key players in the design and installation and operation of that building to talk about the building and why it's there and why it's designed. It's a very sustainable building. So that'll be coming up in February. On Wednesday, March 5th, we'll have Tara Tracy, who's the Agriculture Manager for the Delaware Center for Horticulture. And she's going to talk about how urban agriculture improves sustainability. She's been working in the urban agriculture and sort of agriculture sustainability field for a while. And she helps run an urban farm in Wilmington. On Tuesday, March 25th, Bob Serino, aka Biochar Bob. You probably have never heard of him, but you can Google him. He's a personality. He's actually a student over at the University of Delaware, but he's an expert in biochar. And so this is a really exciting one, because not only is he going to come in and talk about biochar, but it's going to be a workshop where you actually make your own biochar. Biochar is sort of high-grade charcoal. So it involves fire and some other, little coffee cans. Nothing crazy, but you actually will learn how to make your own biochar, which is it's a good, it basically helps you grow food, helps rehabilitate, deplenish soils, and does some other nice things. So that's on March 25th. And then on Thursday, April 17th, Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, I hope I'm not mispronouncing, he's an invited speaker. He's an international figure. He was actually, among other things, the Sustainable Policy Advisor to Mayor Michael Bloomberg, former Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And he's brought in by actually the Student Services. He's a well-known internationally in the sustainability field. And he's going to talk about the sort of the interaction or the dovetailing between spirituality and sustainability. Really dynamic speaker. There'll be a lot of advertising coming out for this, but I just want to kind of put that on your schedule. Okay, so before we begin, I want to make sure you know that there's a sign-up sheet in the back in case you are here partially for extra credit. I'm sure you're here as a general thirst for knowledge as well, but you won't get credit for being here if you don't sign in the sheet, so make sure you do that. There are refreshments in the back, as you probably know, so go ahead and feel free to grab some refreshments. Okay, so now our speaker today, Lemir Teron, who is going to talk about food and environmental justice. Lemir is he's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Delaware, the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy. He has over a decade of experience working in the public sector, including regional coordination and community development. He has a lot of research interests: urban planning and sustainability, environmental justice. Lemir's a good friend of mine. And as you see, he's very passionate about this. He's very knowledgeable, and he's very experienced in it. A lot of people talk about sustainability, but he's actually really sort of proactive and action-based. So he has a lot of experience, a lot of passion, and he really understands this topic, especially environmental justice, really well. And so hopefully, I'm sure you will enjoy the talk today. And I just asked if you have questions that you can save it until after, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Okay? Lemir?
Thank you. First off, I want to thank everybody for coming out on this cold, cold day. There's been many other places, but you're here with us, so I'm very appreciative. Today's topic is going to be food justice. Specifically, what are the food justice issues that are pertinent to us as citizens of the, or residents of the first state? So, brief roadmap of where we're going today. And let's look at the problem. We know that food in the United States is as abundant as ever. It's also as inexpensive as it's ever been. But we have huge problems with quality and access. We know that these things aren't ubiquitous. Not everybody enjoys access to the same high quality and inexpensive foods. Let's look at a couple of trends. Start off period right before World War II up until 2011. This is a graph of the percent of incomes that Americans are spending on food. So you see in the 1930s, Americans spent about a quarter of their annual salaries on food. Through time, it's going down. Currently, we're spending right under 10%. Now, contrast this with the percent income spent on dining out. 1966, spent about 30% dining out. Right now, it's about 50%. One more trend for us to investigate. This is the one we've all seen this before. Percent Americans overweight and obese. So you've seen with the steady decline in the amount of money we're spending on food and the incline of eating out, we see that our health is suffering. 1960-62, obesity rate in society was about 12%. Today it's close to 35%. So, amongst the problems or amongst the causes of this epidemic is what's known as industrial agriculture. And the Union of Concerned Scientists identify industrial agriculture as the system of chemically intensive food production developed in the decades after World War II, featuring enormous single crop farms and animal production facilities. So, like any large system, there are going to be trade-offs, pros, cons. Let's look at some of the goods and bads of industrial agriculture. On the good side, we have less expensive food, as we saw before. We have these global networks of food, and food is distributed ubiquitously throughout the planet. You have the capacity to feed. You're producing more food. You can feed more people than ever. That's on the good side. But on the bad side, let's look at some of the environmental consequences. You have depleted soils, incredibly energy intense. You have threats to water. Let's not forget about proliferation of GMOs, animal abuse, worker exploitation, baffling subsidies, proliferation of pesticides, declining nutritional values of foods, and this facilitation of the Western diet. So let's look at one example from this. We're going to look at a proposal that is currently in front of the USDA right now. They're looking at changing a rule. And this rule is going to change the line speed in poultry processing plants. It hasn't been passed yet, or the rule hasn't been made yet, but it's currently under consideration. And we're going to relate this to industrial agriculture. So, this top graph, this is what poultry line processing should look like in an industrial factory. The bird is hung upside down, it's put in an electric vat, it's rendered unconscious. From there, the neck is sliced. So it's dead at this point. From there, it's scalded. Then you have the carcass. Now, that's not always what happens, though. Things can go wrong. You have this first image right here, and I'll explain to you the problems when things go wrong in just a moment. You have this first image to the far left. Bird flails uncontrollably. Perhaps the bird fights. It's not rendered unconscious in this step. Bird continues to fight. Neck isn't slit. The neck isn't slit. Bird gets put in this hot water, scalded alive. And once the bird is scalded alive, the skin turns red and it's no longer fit for consumption. What does this have to do with when we're talking about food justice? Well, let me give you a couple of numbers. According to records, approximately 800,000 birds die this way annually in American food processing plants. 800,000 birds scalded alive through these plants. So why so many birds in these industrial settings being scalded alive? Well, let me tell you about the rule change. Currently, these poultry line processing plants, they're allowed to process 140 birds per minute. So every minute, on one of these factory lines, 140 birds get processed in a minute. Well, we know the industrial processes, the more birds you process, the more money you make. So we're trying to move from 140 birds per minute to 175 birds per minute. So currently, like I said, we have 800,000 birds that meet their demise like this. What's going to happen if you're processing more birds? Well, we know that the number of birds that are scalded alive are going to go up. What are the consequences for the workers at these factories going to be? Well, we know that if you're a line worker in one of these factories, you have higher incidence of carpal tunnel, you have higher incidence of musculoskeletal disorders. You also have workers in these factories that wear depends. Why do these workers wear depends? Intimidation. If you're processing these amount of birds in a minute, you're working a 10-hour shift, you may not be, and it's constantly in the back of your mind, gotta be production, gotta be production. You're not going to be comfortable telling your supervisor, can we slow down production while I take a restroom break? That's industrial agriculture, people. So, let's look at some alternatives. And I hate to call these alternative movements because we know these movements have been around for thousands of years. The real alternative is the industrial agriculture, but we're going to examine a few of these today. And we've heard these terms before: local foods, food security, sustainable agriculture, and slow foods. First thing we're going to do is look at two of these: local food movement and the sustainable agriculture movement. Go back. What's the local food movement? Excuse me. What's the local food movement? It's a movement focused on geographically condensed way of growing foods. It's reliant on a food economy that is bounded within a certain radii, perhaps 50 miles, 75 miles. We have different ways of defining it. Some people would say 150 miles. And it focuses on the life cycle of food production existing within that 75-mile radius, or within that 100-mile radius. Let's talk about sustainable agriculture. When we're talking about sustainable agriculture, we're speaking about the processes based on scarce resources, the processes that are based around scarce resources, and we want to use those, recognizing that we have scarce resources. We want to promote ways in managing our food resources, whether they be animals or plant life, into the future, so that in perpetuity our soils are safe, our drinking water is safe, etc. These are agricultural systems that are based on polyculture. These are agricultural systems that are based on crop rotation. These are agricultural systems that are based on the minimization of externalities. So, these are very good in contrast to industrial agriculture, but there are a few inadequacies. First off, when we talk about the local food movement, when we say that all our food should come within a 50 or 75-mile radius, at times that can be culturally appropriate. How is this culturally appropriate? Well, let's think about the East Coast megalopolis and the millions of immigrants, the millions of first-generation Americans that live in this sector. What are we telling those folk when we say you should be eating local? What are we telling these individuals when we say you should be eating an East Coast diet as opposed to the plants, the animals that are considered culturally appropriate to the part of the world that you originate from? We know that there are 40 million people in this country that either were not born citizens or are immigrant residents. So we have to be mindful that the local food movement isn't always cognizant, and it's not always cognizant to the needs of those individuals. Let's talk about elites versus participatory. But one thing we need to do when we're going into communities and pushing sustainable agriculture, we got to make sure we're not talking in a way that's didactic. We have to make sure we're not talking in a way that's pedantic to individuals. And let me tell you what I mean by participatory. I was looking at a case study very recently in metropolitan Boston, and there was a urban food garden that was established in an inner city community, and the name of the urban food garden was had the word plantation in it. Now, if you are building a urban garden in an African American neighborhood, I advise you not to use the word plantation. Aesthetically, black folk can appreciate a plantation for its beauty just as much as anybody else, but there's a history there that may keep us away or may disallow us from wanting to venture on a farm or gardens called plantation. So we have to be participatory. If you work with people in communities, when you're setting up these type of things, community members are going to tell you using the word plantation is not a good idea. Global solidarity. When we think about the importance of the local food movement, and at no point in time I'm trying to at no point in time am I saying that local foods aren't good. Absolutely, it's good, but there are some external consequences. When we think about the local food movements, if we get away from buying more organic products that are shipped in from overseas, what happens to those farmers? If an organic farmer in the Dominican, South Africa, Kenya, Uruguay, this person or persons, they have a big customer base in the United States. If they do a lot of distribution to the United States, what happens to their farm? If they lose out a significant portion of their market. And finally, not in my backyard. So much of our movements, so many of our environmental movements are concentrated on, well, we don't want pesticides used in our neighborhoods, or we don't want industrial agriculture plants in our neck of the woods. But what happens if they simply get displaced to a less desirable area? We're not solving the problem. So we have to start thinking about these things in a little bit broader context. All right, so I want to move to some of the local issues we're facing. 120,000 Delawareans are food insecure. And what do we mean by that? These are people who have limited and uncertain access and availability to nutritional foods. They have uncertain ability to acquire foods in a socially acceptable way. By socially acceptable, we're talking about stealing. According to this definition, that would be socially unacceptable. Getting food from a food bank, according to this definition, would be a socially unacceptable way of procuring food. So, within Delaware, you have these food deserts. What are food deserts? These are places that have low incomes, low access to food. By low income, low access, what do we mean? Low access, closest grocery store is greater than a mile away. You have a low level of car ownership in these areas. Low income, the percent is, it's correlated, 20% of your residents here live, at least 20%, excuse me, live below the poverty rate. Poverty rate for one person in this country is $11.5 thousand. Family of four, $23,000. So in these areas, you have at least 20% of the population who are considered low income, low car penetration, grocery stores, 1+ mile away. So these are some of the questions that we're left with when we look at maps like this. We go right here in Wilmington. You don't have a grocery store in your neighborhood. You're doing a lot of your shopping in, or you're doing a lot of your food shopping in these little corner store bodegas. Maybe you get your eggs there. Maybe you get your bread there. I just want to think about the socialization for a moment. You know, when mom sends a 12-year-old kid to get some eggs from these stores, and we know these stores are bombarded with cheap liquors. These stores are bombarded with flavored cigars. Let's think about the socialization of that process. When a 12-year-old kid is going to these stores to get groceries for mom or dad, and from an early age, they have a heightened relationship where they're seeing these malt liquors and they never see fresh berries. Think about that. You know, seeing fresh berries in a grocery store, seeing green peppers in one of these stores, you never see these things. It's almost an attempted genocide. What are some more questions? I was in 7-Eleven visiting my grandmother recently, and there's a big sign. You can now use your EBT card to buy a pizza from 7-Eleven. You now use your EBT card. And do all farmers markets accept EBT cards? No. That's a problem. We're making it easy for people to buy pizzas from 7-Eleven, but the 8,000 farmers markets in this country, less than half accept SNAP payments. That's a huge problem. Now, a lot better than we used to be. 5 years ago, only about 700 or 800 of the farmers markets across the country accepted EBT. But like I said, you can use your EBT to buy a pizza, but you can't use it to shop at the local farmers market. Finally, let's just go back to the socialization point. You know, what does it mean for our humanity if, as a 15-year-old kid, you don't know what a real tomato looks like? You know what a sliced tomato looks like, or what's called a tomato in a sandwich that you bought from a drive-thru. What does it mean if you don't know what a piece of kale or a roughage of kale looks like? You don't know what fresh strawberries look like. It's all a part of socialization, people. Very dangerous. One potential answer. Food justice movement. Food justice movement calls for the access to safe and healthy foods for all individuals. So how do we get to food justice? Well, here's one example. Upper left hand, you have the 12th and Brandywine Urban Farm. You go. This section of Wilmington. This urban farm is in a food desert. Right off of 495. You have local residents, because they can't go to the local bodega or corner store and get a litany of vegetables and fruits. They're growing their own. Think about the value of children visiting this community garden, seeing this community garden in their neighborhood. What are some other networks that we need to be concentrating on? In Philadelphia, you have the Urban Nutrition Initiative, and they have 2 programs that are phenomenal. They have a schools program where they're currently in 20 different schools. They're teaching young children about nutrition. That's the children's program. They're telling them the importance of local, fresh produce that's culturally appropriate. Their adult program is fantastic. They're teaching adults not only about the importance of nutrition, but the importance of preparation. How many of us end up in the hospital because food was cross-contaminated, food was not handled responsibility? They're teaching individuals about salt and fat intakes. So if you want to know more about that, please check out the Urban Nutrition Initiative. And this is a program that was spearheaded by the University of Pennsylvania. You have community-supported agriculture, simply a co-op. You give a farmer a payment. These are articulated in different ways, but you give the local farmer a payment at the beginning of the season. You buy a share of his crops or her crops. Food policy councils, these are typically established by state and local governments. And they have a network of individuals from the private and public sector, local community residents, and what do? They congregate to create locally specific, intelligent, responsible food policy. Anti-hunger networks, self-explanatory. And the most important thing is solidarity. This is consciousness. So we have different pathways to get to food justice, whether we're concentrating on sustainable agriculture, whether we're concentrating on the local food movement, whether we're just against big factories, whether we're against GMOs, etc., we have to show solidarity to the ultimate cause. Last thing before I go, this past Monday we memorialized what would have been the 85th birthday of Dr. King. And Dr. King's final book, masterpiece, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. I believe it was published the year that he died. And this is Dr. King, what I refer to Dr. King as full-blown. You know, he's critical of nuclear proliferation, he's speaking about income inequality, but, and he doesn't talk about food justice in this book, by the way, but the subtitle of this book, Chaos or Community, I really feel like that encapsulates where we're at right now. Current model is chaos. We have grown people in factories wearing pins, diapers, because they're too intimidated to ask for a restroom break. 800,000 birds being scalded alive. We're about to hike that number up because we want to process 175 birds per minute. When we have people in Wilmington, Delaware, who don't have access to fresh, affordable foods, but they do have access to cheap cigars and malt liquors, it really becomes a question, a decision for us to make: chaos or community. That's all for me today. Thank you very much for your time.
So we have time for questions, if anybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Question. We're trying to increase the speed that we're processing these chickens, but I have to ask, how many are getting thrown away? Are they really selling all of this? I know we waste so much food. Is it necessary for them to?
At a poultry plant, how many are thrown away? I have no idea how many. Certainly all of the 800,000, 825,000, they're discarded, but of that, you do. And that brings us to another problem. I don't know how many of the other ones get discarded due to disease, illness, sickness. You're supposed to be inspecting these birds for feces, etc., and that's another problem. The more birds you're processing, you're not going to be able to detect the feces on the bird. You're not going to be able to detect. You barely have time when you're doing 140 per minute. But to answer your question, how many get discarded, I just don't know.
I mean, even though after they're shipped to the supermarket, you know, how many don't get sold?
Right.
I mean, they're trying to increase. I mean, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense to me.
Bon appetit.
Yes, I was hoping you could touch on, you said something about subsidies quickly, about sort of the subsidy environment that food is in right now, and where you see the problems, where you see the solutions and whatnot.
Right. Just very briefly, subsidy issue becomes this. You have a couple of very powerful lobbies that promote subsidies to soy, to corn, and fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of the argument you're on, in addition to those lobbies, some of the congresspersons, senators from those states are extremely powerful as well. So, you know, every year, our tax dollars go to subsidize corn, which is ubiquitous. It's almost in everything you buy, it seems like, in some shape, form, or fashion. Same thing with soy, products that don't even seem like they should have any reason to have these things in it. You know, because it's so cheap to produce those two plants due to subsidies, they get put in a lot of things. You know, was the second part of your question?
Just like what policies or subsidies do you see as a solution? Or is it getting rid of it at a level playing field, or are there targeted ones in states?
Right. No, I think we need to help farmers. I especially believe we need to help local, we need to help small farmers and not big businesses. But what is the pathway ahead? If a corn farmer or if a soy farmer is getting subsidy, why are we giving these same gigantic subsidies to somebody growing kale, somebody growing blueberries, somebody growing squash, somebody growing spinach? So that would be my contention. Not that we need to end subsidies, but we need to be smarter how they petition. And so much of this country is, quote unquote, not about creating winners. But when you're giving a lion's share of your subsidy dollars to just 2 or 3 different types of plants, you're going to create a couple of big winners, and other plants, we're not growing them in community gardens. They're going to be hard to come by. Yes, sir.
In terms of what we can do about this, I know I'm a member of the Environmental Working Group, and they stay pretty much on top of like the farm bills and stuff like that continue to trim the subsidies to small farmers and increase the ones to like Monsanto and all the major mega farmers. Is there anything else? You know, I mean, I say, you know, everybody get on the Environmental Working Group website, sign up for their newsletter, and find out what's happening, and mentioning things to like our representatives, saying, look, you know, we don't want all the money going to the big mega farms. You know, subsidize the small farmers, you know, the ones that are local. Is there anything besides that?
Right. Well, one of the last things I talked about was joining the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. Just to give you briefly what that is, at the beginning of growing season, you give your local farmer payment so that you'll receive weekly or bi-weekly in some cases. You're receiving a set amount of produce every week. That way, that farmer, during the season, they don't have to worry about marketing. Their expenses are already taken care of. And be conscious of that experience. You know, what it's like to know a farmer, to talk to him or her. You know, you can ask him or her what kind of chemicals they're treating their crops with. They can give you a rationale. You know, when you buy from a store, you can't get that rationale. And the second important thing is you get a human understanding of what a bad growing season is like. So maybe in your second year of joining the CSA, you don't get the produce you want. But this is all about nature's life cycle. So I think that gives you a greater respect for, you know, the work that he or she is doing. Gives you greater appreciation. So you ask, what can we be doing? Certainly lobbying individuals. I say join the CSA.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, Mayor, thanks again. You're a round of applause. Incidentally, the Paul Brandywine farm that he mentioned, Sarah Tracy, who's coming in March or whatever, she's co-chair of the Urban Farm Coalition that actually founded that. She's probably going to